So let me start by thanking you for joining us today and introducing you to our participants. So you're a board-certified audiologist at West Valley Hearing Center in Los Angeles and co-founder of OddBoss Private Practice Summit. I hope things are well and you're safe in your part of the world. And I'll leave. Are you able to share the screen with us now?
I'm looking to see, for some reason, my version here, it's looking different than normal. So give me just 1 minute here.
Take your time.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
So I'll leave you, just kind reminder that we leave at the end 5 minutes for question if available. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So thank you for joining us and thank you for inviting me to have this talk today. So the topic today is back to basics, how to prescribe a hearing aid. Now, I think there's going to be some information that's going to seem very, very basic and some that might seem a little bit more advanced. So I want to start with a little bit more of a basic background about hearing aids and then going into some of the expectations and how to choose hearing aids for our patients. Before so, let me give you, thank you, Dr. Sino, for the introduction. I had received my bachelor's degree and my master's degrees from Arizona State University here in the US. I got my AUD from AT Still University in 2006. I was working in a clinic, private practice in Phoenix, Arizona. Before that, I did an internship at Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because private practice has been more the foundation of my career. In private practice, we tend to see a lot of hearing aid patients. So in 2006, after I got my AUD, around that same time, we were working on negotiating to purchase the practice I was in. However, the owner's husband had passed away very quickly, so that didn't work out. So I actually found an opportunity in Vancouver, Washington, which is not Vancouver, Canada, just to clarify. There's another Vancouver, it's in the state of Washington. I ended up purchasing that clinic in 2012. We grew that practice very, very quickly, and it grew very fast, and we sold the clinics in 2017. And then moved here to Los Angeles, where we were hoping to use the same systems and formats to help grow a clinic here in Los Angeles. Now, I've had many board positions within the committee positions within American Academy of Audiology. I was on the board governors for the American Board of Audiology. I do a lot of public speaking, and yes, I am the co-founder, co-owner of the OddBoss Private Practice Summits, which is more focused on owners of private practice clinics. Now, let me go back to 2006. So after I graduated with my AUD, I was shortly after asked to teach at the campus in Mesa, Arizona. So I lived in Arizona, so I would drive there every night, twice a week, and I would teach the advanced amplification course to the doctors of audiology at the AT Still University. So our goals here today are to give a very basic overview of hearing aid history, and I'm going to go very fast through that because that's not what our goal is today, but I do want to give some ideas which will help us later on in the presentation. Talk about some of the components. I think you again know the components of hearing aids, but again, I want to create that foundation. Appropriate expectations of amplification, we need to make sure we understand that, and then we'll talk about the different types and styles of hearing aids, which again, I think most of you will know. And then we'll connect some audiograms to, or we'll talk about how to connect an audiogram to a hearing aid, and then of course, making the right choice, or in this talk, we're calling it prescribing the hearing aid. So the very first hearing aids, at least recorded that we know about, were around the 13th century, where they use horns or ear trumpets. So they use them from cows and rams, and they would actually put those horns. You've seen those pictures. I have a picture of one later on, but there were no standardized shapes, and they used it because there was a larger opening coming to a smaller piece that went up to the ear that provided this amplification. The more modern hearing aids showed up around the 19th century. So in a group situation, I would ask this question: what prompted this? And everyone would yell out something. But in this situation, I will just give you the answer: electricity prompted this. So modern hearing aids started around the 19th century. Somebody named Miller Reese Hutchison. I don't know that person personally because that was back in 1898. They actually that person actually made the first electric hearing aid. Vacuum tubes started around 1920s, right around that time. And what they did is they turned speech into an electrical signal, and then it got amplified. And believe it or not, they could actually take those sounds up to about 70 decibels. This is back 100 years ago. We were able to bring those sounds up to 70 decibels. So that's pretty impressive. Bell Telephone Labs created transistors. Digital hearing aids started back in about 1990s, 1996. And then, of course, now we have current high-tech hearing aids, which we'll go into in just a bit. So the foundation of amplification, I think you can see my cursor here, hopefully. We have a signal in the environment, and we want to funnel it to the ear. And so when it gets to the ear, I'm sorry, I ignore my graphics here, but you see the amplified signal. It's the same signal amplified. So that's kind of a fundamental idea of how we amplify sounds. Well, when we talk about hearing aids, and this is a very, 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 very basic block diagram that I very quickly created, because I didn't want to, the more time I spent on this block diagram, the more diverse it got. And then, of course, certain hearing aid companies use different techniques. So I wanted to give a very basic idea that the same signal that's in our environment comes into a microphone or microphones, okay? Sometimes we have a single microphone, sometimes we have dual microphones. In the past, we even have 3 microphones. And if you've seen some of the boom mics, we may even have more than that. But the idea is that the sound goes into a microphone. We convert that sound from that analog signal to a digital signal. It gets converted to that digital signal, and then we do some form of digital signal processing. We take that digital signal, convert it back to analog. The analog signal goes through a receiver or a speaker back into the ear canal, and everything's powered by a battery. That is a very simplified way of explaining it. Now, I know that we have feedback mechanisms. We have sound processing that occurs to differentiate machine noise from wind noise. We have speech enhancement circuits, et cetera, but this is a very basic idea, okay? So when we talk about what that hearing aid does, if I go back a slide, we cannot replicate or cure a hearing issue, correct? For the most part. So when I say hearing, I'm going to focus more on sensory neural hearing loss. Yes, we can do procedures to help a conductive hearing loss or a mixed hearing loss. But when we talk about amplification in general, we're going to use that more for sensory neural hearing losses. Don't get me wrong, we do use amplification for conductive and mixed hearing losses, but I want to focus on sensory neural. So when we talk about appropriate expectations, we cannot tell a patient certain things, right? We cannot tell them that, hey, we're going to cure your hearing loss. This was a graphic that I found. I used Google. This says deaf. I can now hear clearly. You too can hear. Excuse me. So the idea here is that this ad is very misleading, but of course this is a long time ago. We didn't have quite the science we have now, but we need to make sure that our patients who are going to be looking at hearing aids need to understand what is the appropriate expectation. They're not curing their issue. So we have to make sure that we do not set the bar too high, that, hey, we're going to provide these hearing aids and it's going to cut out all this background noise and you're going to hear perfectly well, because you're setting yourself up for failure. They're not going to do that well with hearing devices. Now, I love hearing aids. It's my background. I spent 10 years on the meeting committee for the American Auditory Society, which was all PhD and AUD researchers and MDs, excuse me. These are all researchers who focus on amplification and what we can do. I spent 10 years on that committee, and I know what hearing aids can and cannot do. I enjoy hearing aid research. I've done a lot of research myself. I still know that hearing aids cannot cure a hearing loss. So I have to make sure that I do not set that bar too high. Now, conversely, I should not set that bar too low. Because what happens if I set the bar too low is that a patient may say, well, if it's not going to help me that much, then maybe I shouldn't wear it all the time, and I should only wear it when I go to a restaurant or to a group. Some of us that are fitting hearing aids currently have probably had those patients who wear hearing aids and they say, yeah, I don't wear them until I'm ready to go to a restaurant. Well, that doesn't give their brains time enough to adjust appropriately. So we have to make sure we don't set the bar too high, we don't set it too low, we set the bar appropriately. So we need to allow our patients to understand some basic concepts of what hearing aids do. Hearing aids in general and to the core, what hearing aids do is they increase sounds. Okay? Now, yeah, we can talk about compression, expansion, and knee points, et cetera, et cetera. To the core, hearing aids just increase sound. Now, sound is going to be background noise. Sound is going to be paper rustling. Sound is going to be the kids screaming in the other room. Sounds are going to be, you name it, right? So sounds, we're increasing sounds what hearing aids do is they try to differentiate what sounds they want to turn up and what they want to turn down. Well, what they do is they increase sounds. They provide the ability to reduce some of this auditory fatigue. We just had a patient yesterday. Yes, we are practicing social distancing. I do have plenty of masks. I even have a mask with the clear screen so my patients can lip read and use those visual cues. We had a patient here yesterday who gave a perfect example that with her hearing loss, she gets tired at the end of the day because she's trying so hard to understand what people are saying. So we want to help reduce that auditory fatigue. So how do we do that? We help them piece together the conversations. Well, sometimes piecing together that conversation can help comprehension. Now, I should put an asterisk marks there. We cannot improve word discrimination or speech understanding, but we can help piece together some of that speech so that I heard C-A-T, cat, not C-A-P, cap. Okay, so we want to use that auditory cue with visual cues. So we want to improve the ability to hear the auditory cues so that we combine it with the visual cues. So if I make my lips purse together to make a P sound versus a T sound, the patient is using that subconsciously, and we all lip read, all of us, you and me both. We all lip read, and the example I use, you probably have noticed, my name Amit. I'm actually of Indian descent. My parents are from India. I was born in the US. However, we watch a lot of Indian movies, Bollywood movies, and sometimes when they're dubbed in English, you can see that something is not quite matching up. And it's not quite matching up because our brains are subconsciously lip reading. So we are using visual cues all day long via communication. So what we do with hearing aids is we are trying to piece together the auditory cue with the visual cues. We also want to be able to reduce some of the noise, some of the background noise. And I say some very carefully because, as you and I both know, we cannot turn down all of the noise. In fact, we don't want to turn down all the noise. We want to hear if we are focusing on somebody and somebody says, watch out, or fire, or any type of alerting signal. We can help reduce or mask sometimes, okay, some of the tinnitus. So again, tinnitus is a whole separate topic. I have talks, I've spent, I do a talk to a physician group, many physician groups here in the Southern California area, just strictly on tinnitus, and I make sure we are very careful about how we approach amplification with tinnitus, but we may be able to help some of the tinnitus. So these are some of the more general ideas of what hearing aids can do. Well, what they may not do is hearing aids may not give us normal hearing. Right? They cannot. In fact, I shouldn't say may not. They will not give you normal hearing. If we do a sound field test, which I know we generally don't do, if I did a sound field test with hearing aids, the thresholds might fall within normal limits, but that does not mean that we have regenerated those structures in the inner ear cochlea to bring back their hearing. We are amplifying the signals. We are giving them crutches to be able to walk from point A to point B, but very, very high-tech crutches, of course. We cannot help them listen better. I can't tell you the number of patients who say, well, my spouse got their hearing aids and they still don't listen to me. We can help you hear better. We cannot help you listen better. That has to do with attention, and that's a separate subject, but it is something that we do talk about. But it's important for the patient to know that we cannot improve their ability to listen. That's something totally different. Now, on the last slide, I said that we can improve comprehension by piecing together certain sounds. We cannot improve somebody's word discrimination scores. So if you're talking to a patient and you tell them, I'm going to help you understand speech better, that's probably a very dangerous phrase to say to a patient, especially if your patient has a 50% or 40% speech discrimination score binaurally, right? So if we tell that patient, oh, get hearing aids and you're going to hear normally, or I'm going to help you understand speech normally, you're setting yourself up for failure, and that patient is not going to be very happy after even just 2 or 3 days of use, because they're going to realize, wait, now I'm just hearing noise in my head and it's just louder, okay? We cannot turn down that background noise to nothing, as I mentioned earlier. We cannot help somebody hear like I just arbitrarily chose 18 years old, but we cannot help you hear like you did when you were a young child, because again, and I've said this before, I'll say it probably again, we are not regenerating those structures in the cochlea to repair the damage. We're helping to amplify the sounds so that the cochlea and the auditory nerve and your brain receive a cleaner, louder signal. We are not curing anything. I already mentioned this, but we're not curing your hearing loss. We are not curing your tinnitus. Now, looking at styles of hearing aids, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You know, I did want to show these top three just for fun. You can see the horn, of course. This is more more modern horn made out of metal. But you can see a bone conduction eyeglass hearing aid. Actually, I have some here too. You have a body aid here as well. Naturally, we're not using those anymore in general. Don't get me wrong. I think I've seen some eyeglass devices recently, but using more with air conduction. The idea is that these are more older styles. Then we have our behind the ear, which I think some people may say, oh, behind the ear is also an older style. Actually, I still use behind the ear for certain patients. If they have a very profound hearing loss, sometimes we cannot get the amplification on a receiver in the canal, which is next. On the list here, receiver in the canal or receiver in the ear or canal receiver technology, whatever terminology you want to use, the receiver is inside. They have full shells in the canals, half shells, and completely in the canals like CICs. Of course, more recently, more IICs, which they call invisible in the canals, which we'll talk about. I am going to not spend any time today talking about extended wear and other devices, but I will touch on it just for full disclosure. I just don't feel it warrants a separate section here. So let's talk about the pros and cons, because I think, again, when we're prescribing hearing aids, it's important for us to know, okay, what is the pro and con of every style of hearing aid. Now, I'm going to separate these into two categories. So forgive me, because I know that there are custom pieces to a VTE and custom pieces to a receiver in the canal. In this situation, I'm going to say that the hearing aid behind the ear is going to be a non-custom hearing aid, and I know that's not 100% accurate, but that's what I'm going to say. So maybe some of the pros here are going to be power. We know the larger the unit, the more power we can get. Why? That receiver, that speaker can be bigger. The microphones can have more space to separate from their speakers, so we don't get as many feedback issues. Sometimes dexterity is important. Some patients, they have auditory neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, where they can't feel the tips of their fingers, or they have arthritis, and they need a larger unit to be able to pick up. Changing batteries, batteries can be bigger. So we have size 13 or 312 batteries. We're a little bit larger, 675 batteries as well, which are very large. They're easier to use. They last a little bit longer, so you don't have to change them as often. These hearing aids, as you can see in the picture here, I did steal this from the internet again. I don't have the rights, but I don't know whose this was. You will see that may, if the normal public looks at that person, they may not even notice that hearing aid is on their ear. So some of these might be more inconspicuous. They do tend to have more features. Now let's talk about that. You can have dual, and I mentioned earlier, some in the past had 3 as well. You can have dual microphones or 2 ports for openings for microphones. You can have a button on the back of the hearing aid. You can have a toggle switch. You can have a toggle switch and a button, because there is more space on the device. Some of the in-the-ear hearing aids, a full shell, even some I've seen in half shells, they also have dual mics and a button and a wheel, but there's a lot of stuff right on that faceplate. So with some of these bigger hearing aids, you may have more features that you can build onto the hearing aid. You do have the option for rechargeability. So back to the, I should put that a little higher with the batteries. If somebody has dexterity issues and they don't want to change that battery, you have the option. You have more options for rechargeability with something that goes over your ear than in your ear. Now, I will give you the caveat that we are seeing more custom hearing aids with rechargeability options. It is fairly new. I know a couple of companies in the past, years ago, had that option as well. So we do tend to see more with behind the ear devices or non-custom. Some of these devices we can use an open dome. So you'll see in the pictures on the right, and I should say that I should have made the disclaimer in the very beginning. I'm not here to promote or say bad things about any of the manufacturers, okay? I work with all big 6 or big 7 or big 5, whichever companies you want to mention. We use Sonova, we use Windemon, we use Starkey, we use GN, and we use WS Audiology. WS is a combination of Widex and Savantos, which I'm not going to go into today. But those big 5 companies, we use all 5. in our clinic. Okay, so the idea is that I'm not here to pick and choose one of these. So if you see a picture and you say, oh, he's talking about that manufacturer, that was just for the effect of the picture. So please excuse the pictures there. But the idea is that we use all 5 because we know, which I'll go over in a moment, that many of these hearing aids, if we do it the right way and we counsel our patients appropriately, we can make any of them work well. There are certain things that some patients require that some companies or some models have that others don't. Well, we'll talk about that. Now, what about the cons? Well, the cons are that these are larger devices. Now, when I say larger, I said that was a pro earlier for dexterity. Some patients may say, boy, that is a big hearing aid on my ear and it looks clunky and I'm very active and that's just going to be in the way. That can be a negative. Sometimes we have patients that, with that dexterity issue, believe it or not, the opposite of what I mentioned 2 minutes ago, dexterity issues, sometimes it's a 2-step system, right? You have to put something over your ear and then you have to put something in your ear. Sometimes the patients can't find the wire. They get the receiver, or they get the processor behind the ear. They can't find the wire to push it in the ear. So now that becomes an issue. You tell them the opposite, they get it in your ear first, well, then now the hearing aid dangling and they have trouble. So sometimes that can be a negative as well. The hearing aids can get in the way. I don't know about you, but I've had patients, glasses, they have an oxygen tube, or even more recently, we have masks. So a lot of first responders that have hearing aids, these guys that are sitting over the ear, sometimes it flops that hearing aid off the ear. Now, I've had patients who have had everything. They have glasses, an oxygen tube, a wig, and now they also have to wear a mask. Well, how much real estate or how much room is actually above the ear? Not much. So you have to be very selective about who you're going to use this style for. And it's not for everybody. Personally, and I think this might be a disclaimer I should also make, I'm a very big fan of receiver in the canals or behind the ears. Now, granted, that's my subjective comments. Some patient or some providers may say, oh, that's crazy. We can use CICs on every patient. Okay, as long as you find success with your patients, that's fine. So now let's talk about the pros and cons of more custom. That custom, again, is something that you've taken an impression of. More often, it's going to be in your ear. And again, I know you can make a custom ear mold for RICs and BTEs, but let's talk about these in the ear systems. The pros are some of these can be very inconspicuous. So that means for the invisible in the canals, you can see in the picture here, the left picture was taken from a company. All you see is this little string with the ball in the end, which of course is the removal line. These hearing aids sit past the first, sometimes the second vent, and the idea is that it goes in so far that you cannot really see it. Sometimes you can look in their ear and you don't even see it. So invisible, right? Some of these, even though they're inconspicuous, you can, they say inconspicuous, but you can see it very, very easily right there. That's an in the canal or a half shell. Of course, full shells, not so much. Now, I just spent time talking about ease of insertion for some of those behind the ears. Well, some of those patients who have peripheral neuropathy or arthritis, I will find that a good, robust canal lock or a thick removal line gives them something to hold, and they just stick the hearing aid right in the ear. So I have to look at that patient and decide what is appropriate. What are we looking at? Well, we have to make sure that that patient has the ability to insert and remove. The anatomy is important. So of course, if there's no pinna, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. Some of these patients have accidents where they don't have a pinna. Well, you don't have the option of putting something over the ear. So choosing a custom hearing aid that goes in the ear is extremely important. Telephone use, you can put the receiver of the telephone right up to the ear. The cons, power restrictions, the smaller you go, the less power. I'm sorry, I'm going to start speeding up a little bit here. We can run into potential feedback, comfort issues because those custom hearing aids need to be a little bit more snug because we don't want the sound to leak out, the receiver sending the signal back to the microphone. We are limited in connectivity. That's getting better, but we're still limited. Of course, batteries are smaller. And we could get more occlusion because we have more mass inside the ear. This young lady, this was a picture that was shot recently. You can see if she inserts her hearing aid this way, she probably is not experiencing a lot of occlusion, but she's probably not maximizing her ability. So if that audiologist is here, you may have an appointment with this person and ask them to make sure they know how to insert the hearing aid. The audiogram. So it's important that we talk about the audiogram because the audiogram is very important. The importance of the audiogram is based on gain, okay? So when we have somebody who has, for example, normal low frequency hearing, We don't want to occlude that ear and lose that good normal low frequency hearing. I will often tell my patients nothing beats normal hearing. Now, I'm not going to say that to somebody who's deaf. I think that would be very insensitive of me. However, nothing beats normal hearing in the sense of acoustics going to a normally functioning cochlea. So I want to use natural normal hearing for those normal areas, so I don't want to occlude the ear. So I may consider somebody to use an open dome in that situation. I'll skip the next one. Somebody with a profound high frequency sensory neural hearing loss, we may consider a frequency shifting type system. I know every company uses their own terminology, but the reality is taking high frequencies and putting them in a lower frequency area. You could. That is something that you may consider doing. I personally don't find a lot of success with that, even with those patients who have dead regions in those high frequencies. Sometimes they say everything sounds mushy, but again, that's a different conversation. But you cannot base your decision or your recommendation 100% on the audiogram. You have to look at the patient, the whole patient. And this, I think, is if you take one thing away from this talk today, you have to base your decisions on the patient, not just on the audiogram. Now, when I talk about the whole patient, I chose some pictures here, and I didn't mean to pick on this poor guy up here in the top, but the idea is that if the person lives a sedentary lifestyle, do they need dual microphones with adaptive directionality and Bluetooth connectivity and remote controls and all kinds of, probably not, okay? So for somebody who lives a sedentary lifestyle, I may not look at a more premium level hearing aid. I may go more to a more entry level or a basic hearing aid. Now, I know there's an argument to be made there that, hey, there are features that might help that person. But if somebody's in a more engaged lifestyle, like in the bottom right picture, you want to have something that has more adaptive directional features and more adaptive processing. Of course, educational needs. If you're working with pediatrics, you need to consider an FM system, and IntelliCoils are important for most of these patients. Anatomy is important. So if you're looking at the patient, I know I just mentioned somebody with no pinna. If they don't have an anti-tragus, sometimes those custom hearing aids may slip out. We are working with a actor right now who doesn't want anyone to see his hearing aids. So we're trying to get an IIC, but his ear canals are like this. And every time he moves his jaw, the darn things slip out. We've tried 5 manufacturers. We're still having trouble. The helix is important for full shells, of course. Pathologies are important. I only listed 2. There are many pathologies that you have to consider, but an actively draining ear, you may not want to put a receiver in an actively draining ear. Now, this next slide, I do want to spend just a moment. If you feel squeamish, please don't look at the slide. This is a patient who was a victim of an acid attack. In the picture, you can see in the middle, this is Chenda. She's in Cambodia. This is part of a charity that I am on the board for. And I did her hearing test. She has a bilateral sensory neural hearing loss. She was somebody threw acid on her. So you'll see in the picture on the right, she has no pinna that I can put a receiver in the canal for. On the left, you can see that I did put a receiver in the ear hearing aid because I can get a receiver in there. On the right picture, even though there is an opening, I could not put anything in there because the curve inside, even the smallest receiver would not fit. I tried to put a dam there, and even that wouldn't work. So somebody like this, you have to consider the anatomy. You have to consider what is appropriate for a patient just looking at that. So which company is the best? Well, this is going to be very controversial, and I know that some people that might be on here that only use one manufacturer will swear by that manufacturer. That's fine. I'm not here to argue with you. Whatever you think is fine, but the reality is that I can argue that any hearing aid can work, and I can make any hearing aid work for any patient in general. So most hearing aids in their respective categories, essentially research-wise, have shown that they work pretty darn similarly. You cannot tell me that using company A versus company B, you are seeing a significant improvement in speech understanding, especially noise. There's data from every manufacturer, of course, that's their subjective data. Using objective data is, of course, a little bit more important. And also there is little statistical difference from a basic to a mid to a premium. And this is a point of contention that a lot of people will bring up, but there is still research that is out there that shows that I can take a hearing aid that might have 8 bands or 8 channels. And please always remember there is a difference between bands and channels. I'm not here to teach you that today, but the idea is that more bands and channels does not mean that the hearing aid will perform better. There's a paper that was done a couple years ago that showed 8 was the magic number, but again, I'm not here to discuss research. You should choose the manufacturer that you are most comfortable with. I tell all my students, when I teach, when I was teaching at AT Still, I had manufacturers from every manufacturer, trainers from every manufacturer come in. train our students on the software and the hardware. There are some companies, or one company right now, the receivers are very flimsy. I'm seeing a lot of rust in the contacts. I'm not going to use that because my patients are suffering. So for me, when that company comes out with a better option, I might start using it again. It's what I feel comfortable with my patients. You have to do the same thing. So choose the manufacturer you are most comfortable with, hardware and software-wise. And finally, I've been speaking nonstop. The summary. The summary is basically the appropriate recommendations to your patients have to be based on the patient, not just on the audiogram. You have to look at the patient and their needs, and based on their needs, you have to make the appropriate recommendations. Set the expectations appropriately as well. That is the bottom line that I'm going to recommend. This is my contact information. If you have patients who are in the Los Angeles area, Los Angeles is a very big city, as most of your cities are. However, if they need somebody in Southern California, I know audiologists all around. I'm very close with many audiologists, even the ones that are down the street. We do share patients because we don't find ourselves in competition with our colleagues. My email address, and of course, I have all those other social media areas or avenues. That's my last slide, so I'll leave that open there. I think I saw there was some chat here. I'm going to go to the first question, and Solara, if you need to insert, of course, you can speak, but I'll answer this first question. How to convince a patient about fitting of hearing aid when he sees different companies' advertisements about IIC hearing aids for every one. Okay, so the question is, how do you convince a patient about the appropriate hearing aids when they're seeing all these ads about invisible hearing aids? My way of approaching it, and this is my way, is I have to teach our patients that the appropriate recommendation has to come from the doctor. So me as their doctor, I have to make the right decision that, you know what, I can advertise a Ferrari, okay, if we use cars as the example. I can advertise a Ferrari, but this patient may not need the Ferrari. I don't know how to drive a stick shift. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I've tried. I can't do it. I tried driving a car in India once and we made it 10 feet. I can't do it. So if somebody advertised something, and if I see an advertisement for a Ferrari, that's not the car for me. I have to trust what is going to be appropriate for me. And my job as the doctor to the patient is to tell the patient, yes, you've seen those, but you know what? That is not appropriate for you. Okay, I hope that answers that question. I see questions are coming in, so I'm going to try to hit as many of these as possible. The next one is, I saw a patient who was using a manufacturer of X, but I tried to fit him a hearing aid of another manufacturer. He was not comfortable. So I think that goes back to comfort. So comfortable is going to be very subjective, right? It could be comfortable fit-wise, it could be comfortable acoustic-wise or auditorily. So really deciding, domes are important, sizes of domes. We have a wall in my lab. I'm actually at the office right now. We have a whole wall that has domes of every manufacturer, okay? And it's a pretty impressive wall. Yeah, that's a very, I'm bragging now, but I'm very impressed of how we did that. We have Oticon, Widex, Starkey, Phonak, Signia, Resound. We have all their domes on this wall. Sometimes we will beg, borrow, and steal, if you will, from one manufacturer's domes to another, because sometimes a dome might be comfortable for our patients. So sometimes if you're comfortable with manufacturer A, but the dome of company B works better, please use it. Use it. Sometimes they will fit, but you also have to be very careful. You can't just take an open dome and fit a closed dome because that fits better and then not make the acoustic changes in the software. Because if you're using an open dome versus a closed dome, there are some acoustic differences there. Your software is going to make those necessary calculations accordingly. The next question is, often we find difficulty in prescribing hearing aids with mild hearing losses or around 40 dB of loss. How do we overcome such issues? That comes down to counseling our patients. I have a handful of patients over the last year that have pretty mild to normal, believe it or not. There are talks lately about invisible hearing loss. The reality is that we use these numbers on an audiogram. Sorry, I think somebody is speaking there, but the idea is that we can't base the expectations strictly off the audiogram. So what we look at is, if somebody has a mild hearing loss, show them the expectation is that, hey, we're going to help you hear better And we're going to affect some of those softer level sounds. But the idea is that we're not going to help you hear somebody whispering from another room. Now, sometimes you may have to look at those objective verification measures. I didn't talk about that today, but we do a lot of verification. So we have a hearing aid test box. We use real ear measures in our, or speech mapping. You can use any of those. Sometimes showing them the benefit. I should be wearing these glasses, okay? My optometrist showed me the data that I used to have 20/10 vision in both eyes, which is very, very good. Now I have 20/20, but I have some issues with seeing small print. I rarely wear those glasses, but every time I go in, they convince me that yes, I'm supposed to wear it, so I will wear it when I'm reading. Right now, I can read every question that's on this screen fairly well, but when I put those on, it's a lot clearer. So maybe that counseling can help those patients. The next question, Stephen, what hearing aid styles can suit a patient with delirium? What is your take on fitting a patient with a mild hearing loss with a flat audiogram configuration? So the flat audiogram configuration is fairly difficult because we know when you put a hearing aid in, the ear canal resonance, and there are certain acoustics that we have to take into account. So we don't just give flat gain, right? The flat configuration depends on how severe the hearing loss is. Let's say it's a moderate, okay, I'll just use a 50 dB across the board hearing loss. You may still want to vent very carefully or use a pressure vent and still provide the appropriate amplification, but make sure verification-wise that you are hitting your targets. I think for most of us, hitting those targets are extremely important, but then we also have to take that data with our subjective comments from our patients. The next question is, what is your steps during hearing aid fittings, for example, sound balance, fine tuning, and feedback mechanisms? We'll try to start first. Good question. So generally what I will do with patients is before they even come in, I've already run some tests on that hearing aid. So every hearing aid that comes in, whether it's a brand new device or a repair that's come back in, we put it in a test box. When they come in, I have the hearing aids already connected to my software because I don't want any issues to come in. So they come in, they sit down, I go over the parts of the hearing aid first. So I show them all the general parts. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not overwhelming them. I'm not trying to show them that I know so much. My job is to say, hey, here's, I'll use the example of a receiver in the canal. Here is the microphones on the back of the hearing aid, your battery's back here, there's a button back here, there's a wire that comes down and goes into your ear, there's a rubber tip that sits inside your ear, and then we have this little tail. Now that's an example of somebody that's using a receiver in the canal with a dome. Now, I don't spend a lot of time going over exactly what each of those functions are doing, but then when I get into the software, I've already preset the volume where I want it to be, and don't take volume, sorry, gain. I set the gain appropriately. And then what we do is we're gonna go step by step in the manufacturer's software. I'll run a feedback test. I'll make sure everything is sounding fairly comfortable one-on-one. Rarely is it comfortable 100%. Then we go in the booth, do our verification, come back in, make sure everything's okay, and then I save everything and go from there. At what point should we counsel a patient? A number of times the patient don't like to upgrade even if the hearing aid is degrading. Of course, if the hearing aid's failing, sometimes you can send the hearing aids in for repair. I'm not going to hit every question here. I do apologize. Advice for fitting patients with severe to profound hearing losses with custom hearing aids. If you can hit those targets, go for it. I personally will always use a behind the ear on a profound hearing loss. That's my own personal, because I know based on my studies, I just can't hit my targets. Do you prefer RIC or BT? Generally, I'll use RIC these days, but I will use BTE. Yes, I use REM. Patient with long-time uses of analog.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you because time is up.